Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week, U.S. Senator Ron Wyden introduces a bill that would create a federal ban on intoxicating hemp products and put the FDA in charge of those regulations.
The Wyden bill, really monumental day yesterday, September 25th, for the hemp industry and the cannabis industry.
Kerry Hinkle was at that announcement in our nation's capital, but that group is also busy helping the hemp industry in California prepare a lawsuit to fight Governor Gavin Newsom's emergency executive order shutting down the intoxicating hemp market in that state. Plus, we talk with Aaron Smith, the executive director of the NCIA, about a combined effort to call for federal descheduling and a single federal regulatory agency for the same plant.
The industry is kind of pulling itself apart right now. And I'm hopeful that this legislation is something that, both sides of the industry can get behind.
And despite 24 legal adult use states, 38 decriminalized states, the FBI reports that there were still over 200,000 arrests for criminal possession of cannabis in the U.S. last year alone, and a 420 record at Hall of Flowers in California last weekend when Seth Rogen's Rolling Papers brand OCB created a simultaneous 420 sesh for over 7,000 people.
It's 420, y'all make some noise, let's go!
Yeah! All that and Coast to Coast Cannabis News on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto. Next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, Pro Cannabis Media's weekly roundup of the news from the industry. I'm Alaina Pinto. A reminder that if you want to follow this show, it's easiest if you download the free app PCM TV in the App Store and Google Play. Our lead story this week is the fight to regulate intoxicating hemp products in all states. That is now part of a bill in the U.S. Senate introduced by Oregon Senator Ron Wyden. This comes in the same week that California Governor Gavin Newsom used his executive emergency privilege to prohibit all intoxicating hemp-derived products in his state. That has triggered the beginning of lawsuits against the state of California led by the hemp industry. Well, back to D.C. for details on the bill introduced in the Senate this week. Both the U.S. Hemp Roundtable in Washington, D.C., and the NCIA, the National Cannabis Industry Association, worked together with Senator Wyden to create this bill. It's important to note that both billion-dollar industries have been waiting for some federal guidance on these products since the passing of the Farm Bill in 2018. That law basically legalized the cannabis sativa plant while using a definition of hemp that's under fire in federal courts. Over the past 6 years, there has been no guidance or federal regulations of the plant, and that has led to a mess of a conflict between federal and state laws. It also tried to put a wedge between the two sides of the emerging industry of hemp versus marijuana. PCM founder Jimmy Young talked to both sides of the cannabis industry, the one referred to as hemp and the other side referred to as marijuana. First up, Kerry Hinkle of the U.S. Hemp Roundtable. He was at a luncheon with Senator Ron Wyden last week, and he recognizes the potential of this bill as the first step towards one set of rules for both industries.
The Wyden bill, really monumental day yesterday, September 25th, for the hemp industry and the cannabis industry. The bill is called the Cannabinoid Safety and Regulation Act. It's centered around a couple of pillars of any products that get any amounts of THC to can only be sold to adults 21 and over. There's some standardized in labeling, truth in labeling, meaning if it's got 100 milligrams on the label, that's what it's got in the package, some good manufacturing standards. There's some funding in the bill as well to study impairment driving. That was something Wyden's office was particularly bullish on. And in Oregon, they have married hemp and cannabis in a reasonable way there too. So he's got to represent both interests because they're both big business in his state. And we're really proud of that bill to have some kind of federal standardization. It's really important that NCIA was a co-sponsor or a supporter of that bill, and we have the 2-pager that we used in Capitol Hill all day yesterday with their logo front and center, along with about 30 other trade associations that say this is the industry coming together, hemp and cannabis, saying this is a federal pathway forward because it sets up a center for all cannabinoids. So in the eventual, whenever descheduling, rescheduling happens, the regulated licensed marijuana dispensary markets can now then fall under this program. So that's why we've carefully tried to do this in a way that sets up for long-term viability for both sides. And we're really proud of it.
A similar sentiment was echoed by the NCIA. Their executive director, Aaron Smith, who also talked to Jimmy about the potential to create federal guidelines for both uses of products derived from the cannabis sativa plant.
So it really kind of tries to level the playing field between state regulations and hemp for marijuana and hemp-derived cannabinoid products. And so to answer your question, I think it is a good thing for the industry to not have hemp products out there unregulated, being sold to anybody underage. And I should have mentioned that bill also would restrict the sales to minors. So yeah, it's a good thing.
But Aaron, it's 6 years too late, or is it 6 years too late? In other words, shouldn't this have been done when the Farm Bill of 2018 passed at that time?
Yeah, certainly. It also it bears to note that a more perfect bill would also just encompass all cannabinoids that would legalize marijuana derived cannabinoids and regulate those products as well alongside the hemp derived products. That's kind of the ultimate goal. This is clearly a political move, really, I think, to try to provide a alternative to the bans that are out there, the proposed bans. I think that they also recognize that they should have done this years ago and trying to come back and fix that.
Yeah, we call that a make good in the world of media. Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is unfortunate that the industry is kind of pulling itself apart right now, and I'm hopeful that this legislation is something that both sides of the industry can get behind.
And the people I talk to on both sides of this issue all say the same thing. We want control. We want regulation. We want guidelines. So it's not like either side of the industry is trying to pull a fast one as much as they're trying to work within rules and regulations that really haven't existed since that Farm Bill was passed in 2018, right?
Yeah, that's right. And those on the state licensed cannabis side are, for the most part, putting up with overregulation at the state level.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we pass these laws saying we're going to treat cannabis like alcohol. Turns out we're treating it much more strictly than alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And then the hemp comes along and it has, effectively no rules. And so there's really a lack of parity there that is unacceptable. So, really we need less regulation on the marijuana side and more on the hemp side and try to find a middle ground there.
How about a one federal agency that just gives you the regulation rules for the plant, that it's the same plant. It's just has more THC, dry weight, 0.3% is the definition of hemp. We'll get into that in the next. But doesn't it make sense to have one federal regulatory board similar to the Alcohol and Beverage Commission that would just regulate this product?
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal.
and let that federal agency fight with the USAG, FDA, ABC, and all the other alphabet soup of bureaucracy that makes up our government.
And there'll always be a place for the states as well, but the problem is that the state systems are kind of wildly different. There's lack of uniformity.
The entire interview with Aaron and Jimmy will be available on our website and PCM TV app. As far as California is concerned, their governor, Gavin Newsom, used his executive emergency privilege to ban all cannabinoid-derived products in his state. Sure enough, many in the industry think he overstepped his authority, which means he is setting himself and his state up for a lawsuit or two. And the U.S. Hemp Roundtable is already starting that process. And it's not that simple in the state of California.
We have been working really hard on a lawsuit now. So we filed a complaint on Tuesday evening. I'm catching up to speed how of a mess California actually is. So when we filed on Tuesday night, in other states, you would immediately get a file number, and then you'd be able to place a temporary restraining order. Apparently in California, because nothing's easy in California, it's not that simple. And so there's a court that has to approve before you can get a file number. So, we have reporters asking us questions on when's it been filed? Is there going to be a temporary restraining order yet? We have companies in California that are unsure if they can continue to sell the products that they're trying to sell right now, because there's this gray area for a couple of days before we can try to place this injunction on the emergency regulation. So it's a mess.
Our California reporter is Lisa Battista, who is involved with the Flavor Co., a CBD company, and she explains the impact of the governor's ban on her company.
This is Lisa Battista from the Flavor Co. As a hemp-derived manufacturer, registered and compliant under AB 45, we absolutely support common sense regulations. However, we've been a good corporate citizen, playing by a set of rules to manufacture high-quality hemp-derived products, and the ban from Governor Newsom literally pulls the rug out from under us and all the other compliant manufacturers in the state, making it nearly impossible to do business. Products must have zero detectable THC, which means full-spectrum CBD is out of the question, and serving sizes are limited to 5 per package. As we read the rules, we cannot even advertise our services to companies in states where hemp is legal, let alone manufacture products. Of course, there's a lot of ambiguity and conflicting statements in the rules, and no clarifications or explanations have been provided by the state. Add to this the impact on consumers. There are already countless stories on social media from parents who rely on full-spectrum CBD products for their children, and this represents just a small portion of the many, many people impacted. As a company dealing with the heavy-handed approach from Governor Newsom, we've made the decision to exit California, taking all our hemp-derived manufacturing out of state, and we will not be renewing under AB 45. With that in mind, the ban is not only causing losses to small businesses and consumers, but also adding financial losses to a state already having financial difficulties. We can only hope common sense prevails before more companies and more consumers have to make these tough decisions.
A few more notes on California. Pesticides in products and inaccurate testing lab results continue to wreak havoc in the nation's #1 cannabis market. The state regulatory board revoked the license from Verity in San Diego this past week, and that lab becomes the 4th lab testing company to lose its license. Now, the LA County Board of Supervisors is asking social media platforms, including Yelp and Google, to deplatform listings of illegal and unlicensed cannabis companies. Well, back here on the East Coast, one state continues to grow. Maryland set a sales record in August. Plus, the FBI reports that law enforcement officers in the U.S. have made over 200,000 arrests in 2023 for low-level cannabis possession violations. Here's Andrew Behringer.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The upcoming 2024 elections are indeed around the corner, but the cannabis rescheduling process seems to have been swept under the rug, even with law enforcement officials making over 200,000 cannabis-related arrests in 2023. The next hearing for the rescheduling of cannabis is scheduled for December 2nd. While we wait for the hearing to happen, things seem to still be moving in the background. The DEA has taken a significant step that could pave the way for cannabis reform. In a recent ruling, the agency acknowledged a new 2-part test for determining a substance's medical value, potentially simplifying the process of rescheduling cannabis. This new test, proposed by the Department of Health and Human Services, focuses on 2 key factors: widespread current medical use by licensed healthcare providers and credible scientific support for at least one medical condition. The DEA's acceptance of this new methodology comes as the agency has been deliberating on cannabis rescheduling for months. This development follows the Department of Justice's earlier criticism of the DEA's previous 5-part test as too narrow. The new streamlined approach could make it easier for cannabis to meet the criteria for rescheduling for cannabis reform. Please stay tuned for those updates coming soon. Now, in a local neighbor Maryland news, Maryland cannabis market is showing strong growth, with August sales topping $100 million in sales, according to the Maryland Cannabis Administration. This includes $73 million in recreational sales and $27 million in medical cannabis sales. The state is on track to surpass its very impressive first year of sales of $1.1 billion, which began in July of 2023. So far in 2024, dispensaries have sold $755 million worth of cannabis products, with the average flower price being around $9.50. Total sales since the market's launch have now reached $1.3 billion, while monthly sales consistently exceed $90 million a month. The state comptroller reports a 52% increase in tax collections from the first to the second quarter, reaching $22.3 million. Comptroller Brooke Learman highlighted the market's positive impact, stating the cannabis industry continues to create new jobs, investments, and opportunities, particularly marginalized areas affected by economic outcomes. Well, that's the Washington, D.C. report. I'm Andrew Behringer, reporting from the White House and our Capitol. I'll see you next week.
Next up, our state reports, and this week we start in Virginia with Joe Parsons.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection, and this is the Virginia Cannabis Report on Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I would like to wish everyone that helped make last week's events a success a happy Black Cannabis Week. The Diasporic Alliance of Cannabis Opportunities, or DACO, was founded by Sharon Perry Thomas, and for 6 years has held Black Cannabis Week to honor the achievements of Black entrepreneurs and other important people in the cannabis community. Her vision to empower the communities that have been the most adversely affected by the failed war on drugs has grown to a now annual week-long celebration. This year was no different, with 4 major events that featured over 30 speakers, cannabis executives, elected officials, policymakers, and many more. The events included the Policy Breakfast, Blaze the Runway, the Rooted in Justice Film Festival, and the Daily Dose Tour. Virginia's own Marijuana Justice was proud to help kick off the Daily Dose Tour on the 22nd in Richmond, Virginia. The tour then went on to Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, and ended in New Jersey. The stops on the tour were areas that were some of the worst affected by the Reagan and Bush era's war on drugs. Each stop focused on different topics of conversation and partnerships with awesome equity-based groups such as at THC Justice Now, at Life After Release, and many more. Thanks again to all the people that made this year's Black Cannabis Week a week to remember, and to the awesome women that started it all. Well, that's going to do it for this week from the Virginia Cannabis Connection and reporting from Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
That'll do it for the A block, but we have more state reports coming up in the B block, plus a story of a major fine by the SEC on former Weed Maps executives, including one who was interviewed on Pro Cannabis Media back in 2021 when Chris Beals was the CEO. All that and more coming up after this on Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
See you again, Jimmy. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it. I appreciate you tapping me on the shoulder and tipping me off a week ago at DCAN that you had been acquired by a company that most people in the cannabis industry are familiar with. It's the company called Weed Maps, and we're so proud to happen to have their CEO, Chris Beals, joins us as well on the Green Rush Live show today. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. This is great. Exciting time to be on with Barrett.
I was going to say, and thank you so much.